Law number 8 is the law of envy. What does envy have to do with boundaries? I'll explain in a moment, but first let me say that envy is probably the basest emotion that we have. Envy defines good as what I do not possess and hates the good that it has. Envy was Satan's sin, and it's a direct result of the fall. The destructive thing about this sin is that it guarantees that we will not get what we want, and it keeps us perpetually insatiable and dissatisfied. You know, as bad as envy is, we're not saying that it's wrong to want things that we don't have. The problem with envy, though, is that if we're focusing on what others have or what they've accomplished, we're neglecting, again, our own responsibilities, and ultimately we'll have an empty heart. And that's one reason why boundaryless people feel empty and unfulfilled. They look at another sense of fullness and feel envious. A lonely person stays isolated and envious at the close relationships that other people have. A single woman, for example, withdraws from social life, envying the marriages and families of her friends. A middle-aged man feels stuck in his career, wants to pursue something he would enjoy, but yet he always has this yes but, a reason he can't. Then he resents those who go for it. The time and energy people spend like this, envying others, needs to be spent on taking responsibility for their own lack and doing something about it. When you find yourself envying someone, let it be a sign that you're lacking something. And at that moment, ask God to help you understand what you resent, why you don't have what you're envying, and then whether or not you truly need it. Ask Him to show you how to get there, or to help you grieve what you can't have, and then be content with what you do have. Next, we come to law number 9. That's the law of activity. Human beings are responders and initiators. We respond to invitations, and then we push ourselves into life. Many times we have boundary problems because we lack initiative, and that's the God-given ability to propel ourselves into life. Passivity never pays off. You know, God will match our effort, but He won't do our work for us. That would be an invasion of our boundaries and our freedom. God wants us to be assertive and active and seeking, knocking on the door of life. His grace will cover failure, but it can't make up for passivity. We've got to do our part. The sin that God rebukes is not trying and failing. He'll forgive that, but failing to try. Passive shrinking back is just intolerable to God. Remember the phrase, just do it? Well, it's true for more than the athletes being encouraged by a tennis shoemaker. Trying, failing, and trying again, that's something we call learning. Many people who are passive are not inherently evil or bad, but evil is an active force, and passivity can become an ally of evil by not pushing against it. We're to actively work to preserve our soul, and that's the role of boundaries. Boundaries define and preserve our property, and that's your soul. Our boundaries can only be created by our being active and aggressive, and by our knocking and seeking and asking. So we need to move out of passivity by taking initiative to set healthy boundaries. Now, we come to the last of our 10 laws of boundaries. That's the law of exposure. As we've said in these series, a boundary defines where you begin and end. The paramount reason why you need such a line is that you don't exist in a vacuum. You exist in relationship with God and others, and your boundaries define you in those relationships. Boundaries really are about relationships, and ultimately, boundaries are about love. The law of exposure says this: boundaries need to be made visible to others and communicated to them in the context of relationship. We've got a lot of boundary problems because of relational fears. Fears of guilt, not being liked, the loss of love, loss of connection, loss of approval, receiving anger, being known. Gosh, there's a million of these. But here's the trouble. These relational fears can only be solved in relationships because that's the context of the problems themselves. See the double bind? It's scary because that's where they happen. Because of these fears, we try to have secret and unexpressed boundaries. Because of our fears also, we may hide aspects of ourselves in the darkness, and that's what gives the devil an opportunity. The biblical mandate, though, is to be honest and to be in the light. And the light's the only place where you have access to God and other people. God wants real relationships with us, and He wants you to have real relationships with each other. Real relationships mean that I'm in the light with my boundaries and that other aspects of myself that are difficult to communicate. The law of exposure acknowledges that our boundaries are affected by sin and that they need to be brought into the light for God to heal and also for others to benefit. This is the real path to love, communicating your boundaries openly.